Moss Lake Island. A motorboat cut through the tannin brown water of Moss Lake in the early evening, carrying three friends. Brandon and Cameron sat in the back taking in the sights of the central Adirondacks, while Seth steered the craft toward a small island that sat nearly dead center in the lake. When you said it would be quiet here, you weren't kidding, said Brandon. They could see no other properties along the perimeter of the lake, and there wasn't another soul in sight. My uncle likes it that way, said Seth. He explained to his friends how his uncle, Albert Beasley, had arrived in the area in the late 1970s, not long after a rebellion by the Mohawk Indians had successfully negotiated. Over the next few decades, Albert acquired much of the property surrounding the lake, setting up his home on the small landmass in the center. As they neared the island, Cameron spotted a camp at the far end of the lake, which until that point had been concealed by Albert Beasley's substantial rustic lodge. They were still a distance away, but from where Cameron sat, he could make out some people milling about the far property in colorful garments hanging from a clothesline. Guess we're not totally alone, said Cameron. Seth, ignoring the comment, piloted the boat to the dock, scattering some waiting loons. When they arrived, the three young men grabbed their bags and headed toward the compound. Mr. Beasley's home was impressive, even by Adirondack standards. It was a grand two-story structure built from local timber with a green shingled roof that complemented the surrounding flora. Cobblestone stairs led up to a porch with a deck above that. The front door opened and a 60-something man with a black beard came out to greet the friends. Welcome to Moss Island, said the man, smiling. Uncle Albert, it's great to see you, said Seth. These are my friends. Albert greeted the two young men with firm handshakes. Pleased to meet you, boys. You as well, sir, said Cameron. The lake is beautiful. It's crazy you have it all to yourself. Almost, said Albert evenly, before inviting everyone in. Cameron and Brandon both took a second look at the property across the lake before following Albert and Seth inside. After unpacking and taking a tour of the home, everyone went outside to the fire pit, where they ate prime ribeye steaks and drank beers. They talked about hiking trails and various urban legends of the northern forest as the sky darkened until the only light remaining was the fire crackling before them. The conversation dropped when another fire ignited across the water, much more intense than their own. With it came music, laughter, hooting, and hollering. Albert, who had consumed 5 bottles of Saranac lager, groaned. Those goddamn witches, said Albert, startling Brandon and Cameron. Perplexed by the strange and sudden outburst, they looked over at Seth for a reaction, but he simply stared into the fire. Albert continued, I offered them a shitload. Everyone else took it happily and left, but not them. No matter how much I upped my offer, they wouldn't bite. I've been dealing with them for years. They're not your average hippy-dippy guys. They call themselves witches. I'm not even kidding. They drink and run around topless, liberated, chanting their nonsense. That doesn't sound too bad to me, said Brandon, grinning. Albert grunted. It's not like you think, kid. These chicks are effing crazy. It's bad enough they howl all night and cause a general ruckus. I call the sheriff on them all the time. No, they really take this whole witch thing seriously. They drowned my goddamn dog last summer. Couple years before that, they poisoned my caretaker. Nearly killed the old guy. All in the name of some phony nature goddess. Cops never do anything about the nuisance. Must be under their spell. The three friends sat in silence as Albert carried on with his tirade. When he was done, he grunted a good night and stumbled away from the fire and on into the house. Is that all true? Said Cameron to Seth. Yeah. Oh, come on, said Brandon, standing up from the log on which he was seated. Your uncle's screwing with us, dude. I think Albert's just mad they won't sell, said Cameron. I wouldn't sell either. This place is amazing. It's not a joke, said Seth. Our family owned this land for 100 years before the state seized it, when the Mohawks occupied it. Brandon pulled a pair of binoculars from his backpack and looked out toward the camp. Dude, check it out, he said, chuckling. He passed the binoculars to Cameron, who saw a group of women who looked to be around their age in the glow of the fire. They were dancing, all of them nude from the waist up. Cameron's jaw dropped. Holy shit! Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Asked Brandon, his breath heavy from the alcohol. He looked over at a rowboat laying on the grass next to a wooden canoe. Let's go, said Cameron. Seth had promised them an epic vacation in the Adirondacks. Brandon had wanted nothing but booze and babes, and they had been slightly disappointed to find out they would be staying on a rinky-dink lake in the middle of nowhere, far from the more popular Adirondack destinations. That there were women, only a short row away, intrigued the 21-year-olds. Also that they were naked. Hold up, guys, said Seth, getting close to his friends. Didn't you hear a thing my uncle said? Yeah, I heard there's half-naked drunk chicks across the lake, said Brandon, smirking. They're dangerous, though. Brandon and Cameron, two fit men in their early 20s, both snickered at the idea that these young women could pose any sort of threat. Sure, dude, said Brandon. My uncle will be pissed, said Seth. He's probably passed out already, said Cameron. We'll go hang out and be back in a couple hours. He'll never even know. Seth continued to warn his friends, but they walked to the shore and pushed the rowboat into the dark water of Moss Lake. He stood at the edge of the water as they propelled slowly toward the other camp. Cameron and Brandon luckily hadn't drunk enough that they couldn't row in a straight line, and they advanced slowly toward the shore, fumbling with the oars from time to time, laughing the whole way. As the pair drew closer, they got a better view of the woman dancing around the fire, their breasts bouncing as they gyrated and waved their arms to the sky. The two friends were mesmerized as their boat touched the far shore. Hey, ladies, yelled Brandon, drawing the attention of around a dozen attractive women. Who are you? Said one of the women, breaking up from the group and approaching the young men. We're staying over there, said Cameron, pointing back at Mr. Beasley's island. Are you pagan? Said the woman, eyeing the two curiously. Brandon laughed. Oh, are you? If you're friends with him, you're not welcome here, she replied. Hey, we just met the guy, said Cameron. His nephew invited us here for a vacation. We're only staying a couple days. Is that so? The woman paused, looking Brandon and Cameron over. Okay, you can come up. I'm Rebecca. She led the young men to the fire. Other women approached and greeted them with no apparent sense of modesty regarding their nudity. A striking raven-haired brunette named Kate offered them cups of homemade wine, which they eagerly consumed. Many of the women had cringed at the mention of Mr. Beasley and gently prodded the men to divulge further information about the wealthy older man. You guys are a real pain in his ass, said Brandon. That's about as much of the story as we know. Yep, he seems harmless enough, though, added Cameron. He's probably told you that his family preserved this land for hundreds of years, said Kate. He's full of shit. Our mothers were the first white settlers north of the Fulton Chain settlements, decades before his ancestors arrived. Another woman pulled Kate away from the small semicircle that had formed before she could finish her thought. He'd hate that you guys were over here, stated Rebecca. You can stay as long as you like, even overnight. She winked at Cameron and returned to her friends. The night went on, and the woman continued to dance around the fire, largely ignoring the men. A few of them got close enough to Brandon and Cameron that the two friends could feel the sweat dripping off the women's bodies. Brandon and Cameron laughed at their luck and thought about Seth sitting back at the house all alone, scared off by his uncle's kooky stories. Sure, these women were hot, but they had met plenty of strange hippie girls at college and didn't think there was much danger in drinking and dancing with what were attractive women. It was around 2 a.m., and the guys were having an unbelievable night when the woman began chanting loudly. Brandon and Cameron sat stunned as the woman removed the rest of their clothing and drew a circle around the fire. Holy shit, said Brandon. It's about to get real. But Cameron wasn't laughing. The incessant chanting and the surreality of the situation alarmed him. He thought of Mr. Beasley's claims of the poisoned caretaker as he looked at the bottom of his cup. He was considering the possibility that they had been lured away from the safety of the island when he spotted one of the woman's legs lift from the ground. He stared intently at her feet to check if she was standing on a platform, but there was nothing beneath her. She appeared to be hovering. When he looked around, all the other women were doing the same. He sat in silence, dumbstruck, as the woman rose several feet into the air. Their chants were now coalescing into a single unnerving voice. The fire reflected off the whites of the woman's twitching eyes, which had rolled back into their heads. Cameron looked over at Brandon, who seemed oddly entranced by the specter of the levitating woman. He tossed a pebble in Brandon's direction to get his attention. The two men locked eyes and, without saying a word, sprung to their feet and hurried toward the shore. They weren't 20 feet from the fire when they heard Rebecca yell, "They're leaving!" The timbre of her voice, now masculine, unfamiliar. Cameron and Brandon launched the rowboat and dashed out onto the lake. They rowed furiously as they made their mad escape back to the island. And as they propelled the craft through the inky water which merged with the surrounding darkness of an overcast night, Rebecca and the others called out to them, yelling something about magic, pleading with them to return to their shore. Both men were exhausted by the time they reached the island. Their arms were heavy and their heads were throbbing. They scrambled out of the boat and hurried to the house. To their relief, Seth and his uncle were outside, standing on the porch. "Seth, Mr. Beasley, you were right," said Cameron, running up the steps. "I told you to stay away from them," shouted Albert. "We told you," added Seth. "Now you've endangered us," said Albert, scowling at the two visitors. "Those women want to destroy what I've built. They've been here before, and I'm sure they'll be back." Suddenly, the porch light went out, and the men were left in near darkness. "Not again," said Albert. Brandon and Cameron were both shaken by the time the lights flickered back on. "It's them," said Albert, looking across the water. "The generator kicked on, but it'll only last so long. I don't have enough fuel to last the night. Seth, you'll need to go into town and get some diesel." He tossed him the car keys, and Seth headed for the motorboat. "You guys follow me," said Albert. "Can't we go with Seth?" asked Cameron. Albert leered at him. "No, come with me." He had them follow him to the side of the lodge, where he opened two wide doors and led them into the basement. He turned on the lights, illuminating the dank space, and Brandon and Cameron could see that the room was set up less like a basement than a doomsday shelter. The walls and floor were of thick cement, and large racks occupied much of the space, foodstuffs of all sorts lining the shelves. "I want you two to stay put while I deal with this," said Albert. They were both disturbed when Albert retrieved a shotgun from a nearby cabinet, but he paid them no mind and hurried back up the steps, locking the doors behind him. "What are we going to do?" said Brandon, unsure of what was transpiring and considering the presumed threat of the woman and a man whom they had only just met with a firearm. "I don't know. He's a fucking nut," said Cameron. "We've got to get out of here." Under the dim light of a bare bulb, they searched for another way out of the basement, inspecting each of the walls, shifting boxes and shelves around. There appeared to be no way up to the house itself. Outside, they could hear something heavy being dragged through the sand. 40 minutes of a controlled panic had passed in that basement when the two young men heard a rustling outside the door. "Dude, we hit him. Get that rowboat by the dock and get back to town," whispered Cameron. Brandon nodded. They grabbed what they could to arm themselves, a thick broom handle for Brandon and a hammer for Cameron. The doors creaked open and they waited in the dark, get ready. "Guys, you down there?" asked Seth as he stepped into the basement. Cameron and Brandon relaxed. "Jesus, where have you been? Your uncle's gone crazy. He locked us down here." "Huh?" said Seth, who was holding a fuel container. quit messing around. You guys have no idea how serious this is. He's walking around with a shotgun. He locked us in here. We're not fucking around. Seth paused, looking at the makeshift weapon in his friend's hands. Okay, let's go. They followed Seth back outside. Brandon and Cameron were about to make a run for the canoe when Albert appeared from behind a service shed, his shotgun aimed squarely at them. I told you to stay put, Albert barked. Cameron froze, holding up his hands. Sir, we just want to get out of here. We didn't mean to cause any trouble. Please, just let us go, said Brandon. Albert shook his head. No, I can't have that. You're too important. What are you talking about? Said Cameron. He turned to Seth. Tell him to let us go, man. Come on. Seth walked over to his uncle and handed him the fuel container. He's right, guys. Brandon and Cameron stared at their friend in disbelief. They ran, but Albert cocked his shotgun and screamed, Don't fucking move! It wasn't long before the Beasley men had tied Brandon and Cameron to stakes in the ground, which Albert had been preparing on the shore facing the witches' camp. The two young men cried and struggled against the ropes, cursing, then pleading with their captors as Albert took the fuel which Seth had retrieved and poured it on the firewood bundled around their legs. Why, Seth? Screamed Cameron, struggling to free himself from the tight ropes around his torso. Seth remained silent, his head bowed. Albert approached Cameron. You don't know what those witches are capable of. We must do this. It's the only way to preserve our family's land. The Beasleys have practiced here since the early 19th century. The old man tossed it at Cameron's woodpile and backed away. Flames shot up, engulfing the fuel-drenched young man. His agonized screams were drowned by the roar of the fire. Albert recited an incantation, his hands held in defense of the island. Brandon groaned, resigned to his fate as he watched the fire consume his friend. He could feel the heat radiating off the burning man's body. Albert turned and handed the matchbook to Seth. His nephew's hands trembled. You've got to hurry, said Albert, looking out at the lake. The witches from the nearby encampment had taken their boats to the water, and they were making their way toward the island, chanting, They'll be here in minutes! Brandon gave one last desperate cry as Seth struck the match and tossed it upon the wood pile. Seth and Albert turned their attention from Brandon's writhing, burning body back to the lake, where heavy wind and rain were suddenly battering the water. The women in their boats struggled as they fought against the harsh, choppy water and violent downpour. Some of the canoes flipped, and those that weren't capsized by the sudden storm burst were forced to turn back. The storm didn't impact the island like it had the water around it. Only a soft drizzle fell, extinguishing some of the red char remaining from the sacrifice. Those were my friends, Uncle Albert, said Seth, staring at Brandon and Cameron's black corpses. They treated me like a brother. You did what the Beasley men have always done to protect our birthright. It will get easier with time,